Americans love sausage and bacon. We consider it almost a civil right to have access to abundant, low-cost protein supplies.
Some of the same factors that make the meat supply chain so efficient and profitable are also helping fuel devastating outbreaks of the novel coronavirus. And according to the US's largest supplier, that supply chain is breaking.
More meat processing plants in the Midwest are closing, and that could impact our food supply.
There are growing concerns about food shortages.
So far, over 10,000 workers have been infected or exposed to COVID-19, and at least 30 have died.
Our members are getting sick and they're dying.
Worker safety and health in this pandemic is really in crisis.
A lot of us were getting scared, knowingly that if we didn't show up for work, we might not have a job.
An executive order signed by President Trump declares meat processing plants as critical infrastructure.
If the administration wants to protect the food chain, what they really need to do is to protect the health and safety of the workers in that industry.
If American consumers are to continue to enjoy cheap and plentiful meat, processing companies will have to navigate a fragile balance of safety and supply. Before we talk about what's happening inside these processing plants, it's important to understand their place in the supply chain for meat in the United States. Farmers raise livestock to certain weight and size measurements so that they can sell them to meat processors. And at these processing plants, factory workers will often kill the animal, break it down into different cuts, and package it to the end product. That is then transported to both your local grocery store and other food service areas like restaurants or catering companies. And it's the efficiency and scale of this meat production in the United States that allow prices to be kept so low. So when some processing centers had to slow down production and in a few cases shut down entirely,
all of a sudden you have a big bottleneck of animals with nowhere to go. In some instances, we've seen farmers that have had to start culling animals because there's just nowhere to send their pigs.
We'll end up having to euthanize either baby pigs or even market hogs on that end because there's just simply nowhere to go with them.
And that bottleneck in these processing centers means that grocery stores in some areas may see a reduced amount of supply. At the same time, these stores are seeing an increase in demand, with restaurants closing and people eating in more often.
It instills a lot of fear in consumers and ultimately in voters to have that right to affordable, low-cost meat threatened.
But ramping production back up in these processing plants and ensuring safe conditions for workers is challenging for the same reasons that normally make them so efficient: their size and the speed at which they operate. Let's start with their size.
What we've seen, the coronavirus pandemic, is kind of highlight this industry concentration, that a handful of very, very large companies control the bulk of America's meat supply. So you have Tyson, JBS, and Cargill that account for about 2/3 of America's beef, and the large bulk of it is produced in a few dozen plants. From the late 60s until now, we've seen about a 70% decline in just the number of slaughterhouses that exist.
This industry consolidation has meant that while there are fewer plants, each plant processes far more meat than ever before, and even a single plant shutdown can have an impact on the overall supply. When just one Smithfield plant in South Dakota shut down, it reduced pork supply in the country by 4 to 5%. The other side of their size is just how many people work in these plants.
Some of these plants are very large. There's thousands of employees. It's just the nature of this sort of work. A lot of industries obviously rely on automation, and in pork and beef slaughterhouses, it's not really like that. You still have a lot of hands-on labor.
It can be up to 2,000 workers on a shift. They crowd into break rooms, they crowd into locker rooms, they all, punch in around the same time using the same clocks.
It's loud in these facilities, so workers have to get really close together to hear each other.
These plants have workers working shoulder to shoulder in every single department.
And that brings us to the speed of these facilities. By now you've probably noticed just how closely some of these workers are to one another. The reason for that is largely to allow the production line to move faster. The more hands along the line allows the belt to move at a faster rate, and therefore deliver more meat at the end of the day.
And it's really physically demanding work, and the pace of the line goes so fast that workers rarely have time to go to the bathroom because their job is to sort of get the meat out.
In order to put space between the workers. They have to slow down the line speeds in order to create a safer environment and manage these, multiple threats. They have to slow down the line speeds.
With the potential for reduced line speeds and large factories still slowly coming back online, returning processing to full capacity may be a difficult task for some time. And between growing pressure from farmers who have nowhere to take their livestock and executives warning of a looming supply shortage, the government stepped in.
Facing fears of a nationwide meat shortage, President Trump signed an executive order today to keep processing plants open despite safety concerns.
We just worked with the meat processors. They're thrilled, and that whole bottleneck is broken up.
But labor groups fear that ramping plants up too quickly could mean workers will continue to be put at risk.
Well, companies have been very clear that they have been taking steps to protect workers. So they've done things like increased sanitation, space out breaks. They're offering PPE, protective gear like masks.
We remain committed to our employees during this time, and we're implementing many changes to assist our team members. We have enhanced the cleaning and disinfection of frequently touched objects and surfaces, and we're continuing to stress the importance of personal hygiene.
Measuring temperatures as they come through the door, face coverings, staggered breaks, expanded room, social distancing, all of these are designed to help keep our workers safe. Keeping our workers safe is what will keep our plants running.
But currently, companies face no outside enforcement of these safety measures.
The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, instead of issuing very clear guidance and recommendations on what employers need to do to protect workers, they worded it down so it says, if possible, consider this in almost every sentence, so that it doesn't really give employers any mandates.
So, there's just a lot going on that shields companies from responsibility, pressures them to keep production up, and disempowers workers. I am a meat eater. I love bacon and breakfast sausage and all of it. We bacon-loving consumers, have to adapt to the near-term reality of, some lower volumes of meat, higher costs of meat. And we have to be willing as consumers to accept that. We're not facing severe food shortages right now. What could drive severe food shortages long-term is if we're reckless, if the companies and the management of these companies is reckless about the health and well-being of workers.